In that great Baptist tradition, Michael Brown's funeral was both a celebration and deeply somber. It was also one more rallying cry for change.
There is a cry being made from the ground, not just for Michael Brown, but for the Trayvon Martins, for those children at Sandy Hook Elementary School, for the Columbine Massacre, for the black-on-black crime. There is a cry being made from the ground, and God is hearing the vision of his slaves.
A few days earlier in Ferguson, and the rain is all that's holding back the riots. The rain seems a welcome reprieve from the chaotic nightly protesting over the death of teenager Michael Brown.
I first heard late in the day, I guess middle Saturday afternoon. I don't know what the police officer did, except I know that he shot an unarmed guy. And I know that all of that I heard about was that Michael Brown was walking in the street. I mean, there was no other stuff going on that I heard about. So.
I don't care what the cops say. I don't care what the cops say. And I don't think anybody should be afraid to say that. They murdered him.
The power of the story of Michael Brown's death is that it can be told in a single sentence. An unarmed black kid shot dead by a white police officer for just walking down the street. Literally, Officer Darren Wilson intended to charge Brown with jaywalking.
There was a stop of 2 youth in the street for being in the street, just for being in the street. And from there, a shooting took place. It appears to be undisputed that at least six bullets were fired by the officer.
The bullet came from the gun of a police officer doesn't mean the bullet did not kill. The autopsy showed they murdered him, and he was unarmed. We have a culture in this country that only certain people are allowed to live, and only certain people are allowed to kill. And those people that can kill are above reproach by anybody.
We have one autopsy report, not the government autopsy report, but the family's autopsy report that shows that there were multiple blows to the body, including 2 to the head. I think we have to go back to the basic question of how should an officer respond to a jaywalking situation? How did things get like this?
Brown was shot on Canfield Drive, where he grew up, and his body was left in the afternoon sun for 4.5 hours by the police.
Police have shot this man for no reason. I watched the man go down.
While neighbors gathered, a crowd that included his friends.
We see him all the time. He killed almost everybody around these complexes. There's not one person I do not know that say, oh, I don't know him. Whatever.
Big Mike Brown has since been accused of being the man in this video of a strong-arm robbery earlier that same day, walking out with a box of cigarillos from a nearby convenience store. But Brown wasn't charged with shoplifting when he met Officer Wilson hours later.
There's a feeling on the side of law enforcement that says we've got a job to do, and this is where some of the problem's having. We have the minority community saying it's not fair. We know we're being picked on, and to be honest with you, I don't know what the answer is.
The question remains, how did a jaywalking stop turn so quickly into a state of emergency? The first step was right after the shooting, when Mike's friends and neighbors took to social media. Protesters then took to the streets.
They're telling the media to turn off their cameras because they don't want no fucking witnesses.
The protesters were angry right from the start, but they were essentially peaceful. The police responded with force the locals had never seen. Things just spiraled. Looting began.
People talk about the looting that happened in a few places, right? And the people who couldn't control their anger at sometimes, right? But the fact of the matter is that is a very visceral and human reaction that you have when you see a child murdered in cold blood. What would you do? What would you do if the body sat there for 4 to 5 hours and the people that murdered him hovered over him and treated him like nothing?
Municipal police quickly called in state police, who soon enough handed over crowd control to the National Guard.
To me, it is an example of just a complete overreaction to the potential of violence from people of color. And I'm not going to dismiss the fact that there were some criminal actions that occurred that night, right? There were real criminal actions that happened that night. But the military and the snipers, they were there, and I thought it was awful. I don't want to see it in. I'm not just talking about it in St. Louis. I don't want to see it in America. It's at odds with what I believe our justice system and our system of government is supposed to be about. The police, I mean, this is the difference, right, between a totalitarian regime and a democracy is the police are supposed to be here to protect us and serve us, and the military is supposed to defend us against foreign threats. They shouldn't be here on the streets of Ferguson.
With all levels of policing now wearing camouflage fatigues or driving armored personnel carriers like Bearcats, it was hard for the public to tell the military from the cops.
One of the things I heard many folks here in the media say is military equipment, military. In my observations, I've not seen one piece of military equipment. I'm not saying they're not there. I didn't see hand-me-down weapons. I didn't see hand-me-down gear. These are being paid for with public funds.
So who were all these rioters from Ferguson on the road for a showdown like this? Well, many weren't from Ferguson at all. Police arrest logs show that only a few dozen of the more than 200 people arrested were from there. Most were from other areas in St. Louis, but many were from as far away as Brooklyn, New York. Part of a kind of increasingly common social media-driven protest tourism. Philip Agnew is from Miami. He's angry, but he's not local.
He would shoot him. As somebody who is politicized and somebody who's conscious, as they say, you think every day about what it'd be like to really rebel and fight against the police force. You know, other people will give you probably way more political answers, and some may be genuine, but I wanted to support, but I also wanted to be a part of a resistance moment.
Us friends and everybody around this community know him. You know, it's kind of messed up how people just, using his name for other things. It's kind of messed up.
It does look down West Fulton in that direction.
Thousands came to Ferguson to protest America's growing injustice. For most of the crowd, Mike Brown is just the latest casualty of the worst kind of racism. But for the people who live in Ferguson, it's more complicated. A few will tell you they've experienced outright police brutality, like Jermaine, a friend of Mike Brown's.
I got charged for attempted robbery that I didn't do. It was a vacant house.
Yeah, how did they treat you?
And they beat me with a nightstick and tased me. That's about it.
You got beat with a nightstick and tased. How old are you?
18.
You're 18. When was this?
Last year.
You'd think that stories like a 17-year-old saying he was beaten by the police would be the kind of thing that people here would be most angry about. But it's not. Almost everyone in Ferguson will tell you that their biggest problem with the police is traffic tickets. And they'll stand by the road in the sweltering heat to make the point.
I worked every day. I worked 2 jobs, to put my kids through school, and I keep my insurance, my car maintained. But every time it's like a police car gets in behind me, even though I know I haven't done anything wrong, but I always feel like they're running my plates. I feel like I'm getting ready to be harassed. You just get tired of feeling like that. And I think a lot of the young people that's riding over and on West Florissant, I don't think that a lot of it has to do with Mike Brown at all.
Rioting over traffic violations may sound crazy, but consider this. In Ferguson, every encounter with a police officer can cost you money that you don't have, even if you haven't done anything. The municipal court here can charge you court fees, often around $50 just to show up, and fine you if you don't show. And even if you win, you still owe the court fee. The local government's number 2 source of revenue is ticketing. It's an almost $3 million line item. And Ferguson has a 90% poverty rate.
It is almost a rite of passage in this community for young kids to have contact with law enforcement. They must almost pass through the municipal courts. Many, many kids will say they have warrants out of our municipal courts for the most benign and ordinary behavior.
So when a 17-year-old in Ferguson tells you that they have $3,000 of paper out on them, that's the running total of the fines they owe. And Ferguson is only one of 91 different municipalities in St. Louis, each with their own police agency. You can cross 8 jurisdictions in one 3-mile stretch of road and be fined each time for the same broken taillight. Unpaid fines lead to warrants.
Says they're not showing up because they're running from their obligation to the law, so we must issue a warrant for the rest.
Avoiding a warrant can lead to jail time. And this all often starts with an ordinance violation, like a broken taillight or jaywalking. And because this is all civil law, you won't get a court-appointed lawyer to clue you into the fact that much of this may actually be unconstitutional.
I would say that the courts believe that these charges are so low level and so trivial that you don't even get a lawyer, right? You're getting a traffic ticket. But then 3 steps later, people are in jail. And I don't think the courts, the people who are in the courts, have a good understanding of the havoc that they're wreaking on people's lives when they're ticketing them and then trying to collect this revenue.
None of this changes the fact that a white police officer shot an unarmed black kid on a jaywalking stop. Nor does it change the fact that the officer in question has yet to have his day in court. But it might help to explain why so many people in Ferguson use the same word to describe the last 2 weeks. They say something like this was inevitable.
Michael Brown does not want to be remembered for a riot. He wants to be remembered as the one that made America deal with how we gonna police in the United States.